Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest installment of Chop It Up NC, which is an event of the North Carolina Democratic Party. Tonight we will be speaking to Mr. Braxton Winston, who is a member of the Charlotte City Council and is serving as Charlotte's Mayor Pro Tem. He is also a candidate for the North Carolina Commissioner of Labor. And you see a sign behind me which says Famous Toastery. And you know how it is when we get inclement weather in the state and we have difficulties with internet. And so I had to improvise a little bit tonight and find a comfortable spot. And so I'm very, very fortunate to be able to be here tonight with all of you and also Braxton. Let me tell you a little bit about him. First of all, he is an outstanding individual, an outstanding civic leader and activist. And I'm sure he'll tell you more about that. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio. Braxton Winston is currently serving as an at-large member and Mayor Pro Tem of Charlotte City Council with the goal of developing a city that is more equitable, accessible, and interconnected. The Charlotte community has been working to change the direction of the historical inequities that have defined Charlotte's growth. And Braxton Winston believes good governance and leadership from our council manager form of government is integral to achieving Charlotte's goals. He was born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. His father was stationed in the U.S. Marine Corps. His mother was a public school teacher in math. He lived in Brooklyn, New York, and he has flourished since coming back to Charlotte, North Carolina. I believe that's a sufficient introduction. I could say more about you, your education at Davidson, so forth and so on. But Braxton, it's good to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Dr. McAllister. Appreciate the invitation.
This series that we've been having now for roughly 2 years has been a hit, in my view, for all the viewers in North Carolina and some even out of the state of North Carolina, because we're talking specifically about issues here in North Carolina that impact men of color. But you're also running for the state office of Commissioner of Labor. So we're going to talk about those issues as well as political issues impacting men of color. But as a kind of introduction, why don't you share with us a little bit about your priorities as an activist and politician?
Well, thank you for that. You know, I think my definition of an activist is somebody or a person, entity, an organization that uses their platform to amplify the voices of others who might not have the same type of platform. I've been blessed over the past 7 years, just about, to be quite suddenly entrusted by my community in the Charlotte area, in the Charlotte region, and that has extended elsewhere since. The privilege and responsibility of being trusted by many to amplify their voices in the many rooms and the many tables and the places that I go. It started in 2016 after Charlotte Mecklenburg police killed Keith Lamont Scott here in the university section of Charlotte, and I found myself at the front lines of many difficult conversations. I utilized, I don't know if everybody remembers the late summer of 2016, but as a nation, we were experiencing some pretty divisive times, and I think we were questioning a lot of what we saw and felt around us. And I was doing things like utilizing social media, utilizing the platform that I had built there to disseminate facts about what was going on in the community so that people could determine their own truth. I was speaking up for the people, the community that was gathering around me, and also, just having conversations with our leaders in government, our civic leaders, and our business leaders. Those conversations, some were spirited, emotional, loud. Some even got violent. But they were all based, in my belief, in democracy, in the idea of this nation that where I believe in the expansion of the equal protections of rights for all people. What are our democratic and our constitutional kind of values? How are those expressed in law, and how are those expressed in the forces that govern it? I saw the opportunity, the need to work in the area of policy and law. Again, as I got invited to different tables in different rooms, and a year later, I ran for office. Again, on a platform of a more equitable, accessible, and interconnected city. And that's what I've been doing for the past 6 years that I've been elected. I've been elected 3 times. And I look forward to having this conversation really across the state over these next 18 months as we look at the importance of workers' rights, and the ability for workforces to thrive in different parts of the state.
All right. Well, then let's just jump right into it then, since you mentioned worker rights, and I know that is a key aspect of your platform as a candidate. I don't know that we've had someone run for the office of Commissioner of Labor who has had the kind of background that you have as an advocate for workers' rights. What do you see as some of the challenges these days, and how do you reconcile those challenges with an elected position at such a high office here in the state of North Carolina?
Well, like you said, I've been a worker all my life. I currently, like many of the folks probably on this call, I work for wages by the hour, and as I've governed from that kind of framework of a more equitable, accessible, and interconnected Charlotte and Charlotte region, it has become clear to me, whether we're talking about affordable housing, whether we're talking about transportation, schools, the way communities are developed, the common denominator in that is, are people able to sustain employment? Are they able to sustain employment that provides wages that they can live by? Are they surrounded by a community that nurtures them in a way that makes it so that honestly they can wake up and go to work every day and take care of the needs of themselves and their family? And on the other side, I don't even necessarily think other side is the right way to reference it. Are employers, are our businesses able to tap into those workforces in our communities? Our communities are more stable when employers are able to thrive and provide those good jobs and resources, and we're more fragile when those employers leave. So as I've been in a position to govern in a place like Charlotte, in a region like the Charlotte area, and go to different communities and go to Raleigh, it becomes clear to me that we need leaders who are going to build coalitions, not just in any one place, but city to city, community to community. And I think it's important that you have somebody like me that understands the environment of work, the needs of workers, to be in a position at the Department of Labor that is governing from that kind of lens.
I've got several questions I want to ask, and but I'm going to start with this one and then work my way back into what you just mentioned, which is the needs of workers here in North Carolina. When you were at Davidson, your major was in anthropology. And so I just have this suspicion that your studies of anthropology have something to do with your priorities as a politician.
Yeah, this might be a politician's answer, but I honestly, I don't like to think of myself as a politician. I like to think of it as leadership in government. I think there's certainly, obviously, I work in an arena where politics is important, right? We go through a big job interview, an election campaign, where I'm telling people my lens, right? As an anthropologist, what I look at is how we do what we do. That's how I define culture, how you do what you do. And during this campaign, what I'm trying to tell you is how I go about putting my lens, my culture of governing on it. I think politics, if you focus on the politics, you only focus on the things that you believe in, and you box out anybody that doesn't necessarily agree with you. You don't include voices that are going to work towards your ends. And I think we have way too much of that, not just in this state, but in this nation around our democracy. I really look towards the common ground, right? What can I do in my position to get things done? And you don't get anything done in a democratic government if you're not able to find common ground amongst somewhat like minds and somewhat differing minds. So I think we talked about it the other day. The way I think about it, for instance, you can get two seemingly different parties at the table. Let's say one side of the table you got Planned Parenthood, and the other side of the table you got the Catholic diocese. If you just want to play politics, right, you're going to put abortion on the table and you're going to hear a screaming match from one side or the other. They'll never be able to work together on those things. But if you actually want to govern and push the work forward, you'll put something on the table like increasing the access to women's health care in economically underserved communities, or investing in the eradication of cervical cancer for women all around the world. That's something both of those entities can work arm in arm in without compromising their values. And that's how you get stuff done. That's the culture I try to curate. Right? How can I work with the other people that have been entrusted by the folks in their community to go and represent, to find common ground issues, to make our community stronger, make quality of life better, and to again expand the equal protections of rights under the law for more people.
You mentioned so many buzzwords just now, and my head is just ringing with things I want to ask you. So you have to be patient with me. And by the way, those of you who are listening to this call, if you want to jump in tonight and ask a question of Braxton, feel free to do so. Use the raise your hand feature, or you can put a question in the chat. I'll be happy to take a look at that and see if we can interrupt the flow of this conversation and pose some questions to our Chop It Up guest tonight. Let me talk a little bit about culture and compromise. I want to get to the role of the Commission of Labor, but prior to that, you mentioned compromise and you mentioned culture. And the culture that we're in right now, as we all know, doesn't seem to involve a tremendous amount of compromise on anything. And so as a person who speaks for the people and for the average everyday worker, it seems to me that you might have your ear to the ground in ways that some politicians who are not interested in compromise, but who are fixated on ideology, you might have your ear to the ground in ways that could help heal the divide that we have in this country. So what are some of your thoughts about that? Not just as a candidate, but as a human being, as a voter, as a citizen, as somebody who cares about democracy?
Yeah, compromise is an interesting thing, right? I don't think it's very difficult. It is not. It's kind of as I talked about in the last question. It's not really a viable path forward to ask people to compromise on their values, right? People are often uncompromising in the things that they hold close, right? And as they should, right? People are uncompromising sometimes about their faith, about their family, about the things they need in their homes, to enjoy the quality of life. People should be in a lot of ways uncompromising on those things, right? But in public life, you have to understand if you don't find ways to work with one another, those things that you're uncompromising about can be made more fragile if you're not willing to hear what other people are saying, if you're not willing to hear hear what other people are saying, or you're not willing to honestly disagree and that be okay. You're not going to change everybody's mind, but those two things might not be mutually exclusive. For instance, in the realm of work, uncompromising I am about workers' rights, the need to have a living wage, the need to have access to affordable health care in the forms of mental and physical health, the uncompromising need to have a communities that provide housing that is affordable and close in proximity to places of work and other amenities. That doesn't mean, as being an advocate for workers' rights, that I am anti-employer, right? I want my business, the business that I work for, to make more money. I want that business person to be successful and grow and expand. And I want to be invested in that business so I can help it be successful. So I can get more, and my brothers and sisters at work can get more. Right? Those two things are not mutually exclusive. I'm a union guy. I'm a member of two locals in IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. And what I say, I've been lucky that I've never had to organize my workplace. Workers who do organize, workers who do go through that process, right? They don't do it because they have nothing, because they don't love their job, right? They do that because they love their job. They love the work that they do, and they just want to do it in dignity. So it's a process where you get to a mutual understanding where both sides, both the employees and the employer, are able to come to compromised agreements. So business can get done, workers can be taken care of, and mutual interests can be identified and worked on without compromising necessarily your closely held values, but maybe compromising year to year, contract to contract on how do we attain those goals.
Okay. All right. I see that we've got two hands raised. And so I think I saw Stanley's hand first, and then Preston, we're going to come to you. I want everyone to think about what the Commissioner of Labor's responsibilities are if you don't know what they are. And so we're going to come to that in this next segment. But first, I want to turn to Stanley, and then we'll come to you, Preston. Stanley.
Actually, that was my question. What are the responsibility in that role?
All right.
But,
well, then let me read something.
But I have a second part of it as well. And the
Sure.
second part is any decisions that you make, does it have to go through legislation, or is it a situation in which you could make a decision and it could just go immediately to the governor? Does it have to go through legislation, any changes you want to enact?
Well, first I'll start with the second part of the question. The Commissioner of Labor is one of the 10 Council of State positions. So it is a member of the executive branch of government. So it is the duty is to enforce the laws that are on the books, Chapter 95 of the North Carolina Code, which governs our labor laws. Those laws are, of course, set by the General Assembly. So we wouldn't make the laws, but we enforce the laws. The Commissioner of Labor, again, like those other 10 members of the Council of State, are independent members of the executive branch, meaning that you're elected to run that part of the executive part of the government. You don't necessarily answer, for instance, to the governor, nor do you answer to the General Assembly. You certainly work with both branches of government. For instance, the legislature in their budget, if they ever pass one, funds the Department of Labor. They are responsible for setting the laws that govern how you are able to pay government employees in that department. And you, of course, would be an advocate at the General Assembly for laws that don't exist that might be necessary, but also for laws that might be counteractive to the mission and vision of the department. You do have rulemaking, several different rulemaking abilities within the Department of Labor that have to go through certain processes that are governed by state law. But the Commissioner of Labor does have wide policing powers over things like the health and safety of workers. So every time there's a workplace accident or a workplace death, investigations headed by the Commissioner of Labor or an appointee of the Commissioner of Labor takes the lead in that. They're also responsible for administering the laws over fair pay, child labor, migrant housing are some of the things. But there's also a wide public safety aspect to the Commissioner of Labor and the Department of Labor. Every year, every single elevator in this state, over 25,000 of them, has to be inspected by the Department of Labor. So does every ski lift. So does every escalator. Some of you may have seen a couple months ago that there was a video at Carowinds amusement park down here, where the Fury 325, one of the tallest roller coasters in the world, had a huge crack in it. All of those amusement park rides, every Ferris wheel that makes it to every county fair must be inspected by safety compliance inspectors from the Department of Labor. Little fact about that: currently, nearly 1 in 4 of those positions goes unfilled. So that means it's very difficult on a statewide level to make sure those things that you're putting yourself on, your children on, your mothers, your grandmothers on, they're likely not to necessarily be inspected on time every time. So one of the most important things that we can do is work with the General Assembly and work with different branches of government to make sure that public safety duty is being done. And that, of course, would be my number one priority.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley, for that wonderful question. Let's and let me mention some of the other areas of the commissioners of labor. I should say the commissioner of labor's responsibility, specifically boiler safety and pressure vessels, elevators and amusements, as you've heard, or rather I should say amusement devices, Mine and Quarry Bureau, the Occupational Safe and Healthy Division, or OSHA, and then he mentioned also retaliatory employment discrimination, which gives an opportunity to deal with a host of issues that include race, but are not exclusive to race. And then you've got wage and hour type issues. And so thank you for the question, Stanley, very timely. Let's turn to Preston. Preston, what is your question for our guest tonight? I think you're muted.
I have a question A in reference to Braxton Winston's conversation. In politics, you have to be able to reach across the aisle. Meaning, if you're a Democrat in power, you have to reach across the aisle and find something in common with your Republican opponent. You have to be able to not give all your principles. You keep some of your principles, but you let some of them go and take on some of the Republican principles to come to a common ground and get the law passed that you want passed. That's the statement I want to make to Braxton Winston. And my second statement is in reference to the Department of Labor. Who is responsible for raising wages in North Carolina? Because a living wage is definitely needed at the present moment.
So let me repeat the questions. Thank you, Preston, for those excellent questions. One is, how do you reach across the aisle? I think that's the spirit of the question. And number
Yes.
two, who's responsible for raising wages? And I'd imagine both of those involves your ability to work with politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, in the General Assembly as a spokesperson and advocate for the commission. So how would you do that if you were elected by the voters to serve the state as our Commissioner of Labor?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Gibson, I'll start with, in terms of reaching across the aisle. I see that hat you have on your head. I grew up as a New York Giants fan, so maybe I won't start the conversation talking about recent Super Bowls or anything like that. But maybe we could talk about our love for football, one of the greatest sports to ever come about. But I think you're absolutely right. Labor really shouldn't be a huge partisan issue. As being a worker and a union person in North Carolina, listen, even before I started doing politics from an elected position, I've had the privilege and pleasure of talking to workers all across the state. And I can tell you that there are a lot of working people, a lot of my colleagues, right, and that might not agree with me on certain things. For instance, on the social side of things, maybe or maybe not. But there are things that we can agree upon that, around the dignity of work, right? That you should get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. That there's a certain responsibility, a certain agreement between employers and employees that need to be upheld to keep workers safe. that you deserve a break throughout the day, that you deserve certain protections in order to get things done. Also, that, you know, every employer's highest cost in their business is going to be in labor, and their highest cost is even under that is going to be the need to hire new labor and hire and train new labor. So there is a vested interest, regardless of the side of the aisle, side of the aisle you're on, to create or sustain workforces that are healthy, that are thriving, so businesses can thrive in our communities. And that really, I think, has to be at the crux of it. When look at community, I don't care if you're in big cities or older mill towns, we all are more fragile when businesses close. I was just in I was just in Asheboro a couple weeks ago. That county is as red as a beet, right? Red as a beet. But they just had a furniture warehouse, a furniture factory close. And I'm talking about in the way that workers came to work on Monday and they found locks on the gates, right? I don't care who you vote for. When over 900 people in your community suddenly lose work, that is going to strain your public resources. That is going to make families less stable. That is going to disrupt young people in their schools, right? So how do we find ways to focus on those things that cross over, especially in this role of the Department of Labor? So we're not necessarily fighting culture wars, but working on behalf of workers, working on behalf of employers to be responsive, to let them know what they need to comply to so they can be compliant, and work on behalf of the public that depends on the jobs to get done. To answer your question about who raises wages, to be completely honest, employers raise wages. But I am of the strong belief, and this is what how I've governed here in Charlotte, to say, hey, we as a government, we are a large employer, right? We don't have the same ability to change our business plans year to year to generate more revenue, to pay. We have to make it a priority to pay our workers, to provide them with benefits so that their families are sustained by those wages. And by doing that, if we create policies and practices that do that, we set the example for our other private partners that set an expectation to say, hey, you partner with us. If you want to come and benefit from our communities through having access to our workforces, there are certain expectations that we have as a community. And I think government can have a strong kind of level setting ability by including that in the way that they run their shops. I know we have some workers from Charlotte here, or people that represent workers. I think they can speak to that have governed from that perspective. And I think it's much needed on the state level. Up to 37% of workers in their first year across state governments leave within their first year. And they usually leave because they can find better jobs, the same jobs that pay better wages in a different private setting. What that means for you as the taxpayer is that that work still has to get done. So existing workers used to often have to do the jobs of 2 or 3 other workers. That means you're paying more in overtime, and there's a chance that the public service that you do pay for doesn't get done. That's not fiscally responsible. And again, I think we in the government have a responsibility to be fiscally responsible, but also to set those public expectations.
And so as I'm listening to what you're saying, and I do see your hand, Yvette, and we're going to come right to you. I want to just toss this thought out. At some point, we can get into this a little bit more if we have time. A lot of people don't understand the difference between what it means to be Commissioner of Labor and to work with entities within our state that are responsible for development. And so at some point, would you speak to that differentiation and what the Commission of Labor might be able to do to influence the process of development? And by development, we're talking about bringing new jobs to the state, finding new opportunities for those 900 workers that you just mentioned in Asheboro who suddenly found themselves without employment, which is a very tragic thing. And it seems to happen in waves. We're here in Concord, and my colleague with the North Carolina Democratic Party, Sophie, has lived in Concord. And so she may have heard or recalled years ago before we both were here, when Concord Mills shut down. And it's my understanding close to 4,000 jobs in a single day were lost. And so that had a devastating impact on the economy here. And quite frankly, I believe Concord and even Kannapolis, this county, is still in a process of recovery. And we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 decades, if not more. And so we really need to talk about development, jobs, and who is disproportionately being impacted when jobs are lost in that way. So give that some thought. Let me go to, let's go to Yvette while she has her hand up in the air. Yvette Townsend, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me. City Councilman Braxton Winston is my councilman at large, and I really appreciate all of your service. Really hate to see you leave the council, but I wish you all the best for us, the work that you do for us as you endeavor to go to the Department of Labor. My question is, since Preston brought up that issue, is, the trucking firm Yellow recently filed bankruptcy, large trucking corporation. And I had friends I saw on social media talking about, they lost their pension, they lost their health care. I told her to find out who her representative was and to talk to that person about, but what should a worker do, an employee do if they found themselves in that predicament? Should they reach out to their union rep? Should they reach out to the representative, or all of the above? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a bit of an all of the above. Again, I think this is the difference between politics and leadership. The way I try to approach things, the way I approach these issues around workers specifically, let's talk about that, is I believe in a whole worker approach, right? Like, workforces are not, the worker safety, worker health does not stop at the doorstep of your workplace, right? If workers don't have safe and stable housing to go to and come home from when they enter work, they're not going to be at their best, right? If the workers are hungry because they don't have access or cannot afford food at the end of the day, they're very likely not to be in a situation where they're not going to work as safely. They don't have the training, right? The educational opportunities to keep up with the way work changes year to year and from time to time, then they're going to be more fragile. So I think it's incumbent on us that have the ability to hold office, not just to become smart about some of the narrow kind of lanes that our positions hold and are responsible for, but how can we work across those lines of government? How can I work with those other departments in the Department of State? How can I work with the General Assembly? But how can I work with counties and municipalities to understand what are the needs of their workers in their communities on the local level? How can we work with employers to understand their needs? How do we work with those community-based organizations that are on the ground, that know the nuances really down to the block by block level, so that we're able to continue to, if we don't have the answers, don't throw our hands up and say, that's not my responsibility. How can we point people in the right direction? Because workers, especially again, wage workers, folks that are working hour by hour to put food on the table, the last thing they have is time to figure out how all of these different departments work, right? That's what we're here for. We're here to make sure that we are creating those webs of care that are accessible to people wherever they're at, whatever situation they're in. That's the promise of a democracy, right? It's for everybody, right? It's not if you make enough money to be able to participate in it. It's not if you know the right people. It's for everybody, and we have to. I think our elected leaders, we're in a very particular place where we're able to work with the professional side of government as well as the public to help build that web that is ever changing based on the ever changing needs of things like the work environment, whether there are sudden changes like Yellow or like that mill in Randolph County, or if there are things that we can see over time, like the impact of AI and that's going to have on so many different workplaces, or how electrification is going to change the way certain industries operate. So I think it's specifically the role for us in elected position, but to figure out not how we can figure it out by ourselves, but create the framework using the vast resources of governments, and especially the resources of those partnerships that they have community to community. I hope I answered your question.
So we're going to pivot for just a moment. And Kenny, I do see your hand, and Preston, I do see your hand. And thank you for that wonderful thumbs up, Yvette, in response to what you just heard in response to your question. We need to pivot just a little bit and talk about the 2024 election. Of course, you are a candidate in 2024. And we know that if elected, you will serve for a term of roughly, what, 4 years, is it?
4 years, yes.
Okay. And so I think the question that is part of the Men of Color Chop It Up series is, how do we turn out voters? The voters who understand the issues, who are voting intelligently, who are voting their interests, and who are not being, pardon me for explaining it this way, but deceived or tricked or bamboozled into thinking that just because they vote the way they've always voted, that their interests are going to be represented. I think one of the things that people like about you, Braxton, is the fact you speak with a sense of moral integrity and concern for people. And so you talked about the web of care. So how do you expand the web of care or translate that into getting men of color in particular to understand that you, for example, are really looking out for the interest of not just men of color, but you're certainly not leaving us off the table. And that does seem to have a way of happening when we talk about certain politicians from a particular party that we won't name explicitly.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that you have to do, again, I'll speak in a democracy, is find ways to meet people where they're at. So, for instance, Yvette mentioned those yellow drivers that are all of a sudden out of work, or those workers in that factory in Randolph County, much of whom are people of color, a lot of immigrant labor as well. We need to go and meet them where they're at and to help them, right? They might not care about the inspections of roller coasters, the same as they care about, again, as Yvette asked, who do you need to go talk to? Can we get them in touch with that economic development corporation that is being funded by the county, the tax dollars that you pay to the county? Are we getting you connected to the vast resources of your community colleges that are helping, right? Are we getting you in contact with those grassroots organizations that you're going to be able to, that are going to answer those phone calls at 11 o'clock at night when things get really hard? I think if we go there, not just focus on, for instance, what is good for the Democratic Party or what is good for our individual campaigns, how do we go there and really meet people and help deliver them the types of services that they need? That is something that really does speak to them, and that gets people to want to continue to be involved. Maybe they won't necessarily all of a sudden trust you, but they can see, oh, this is a system that I can plug myself into. I've found that some people just turn a blind eye to doing things like voting or participating in electoral politics because they don't see how their interests can be met. And they don't see how they can find their own place. So meeting people where they're at is so important. And in doing so, when you do that, I think one of the biggest things, and again, this is how I think I really got involved in 2016. You can't tone check people. Right? You can't tone check people. You have to let people express themselves and live in the truths of their life, of where they're at. You know, I found myself, again, like I said, the privilege and responsibility of amplifying other people's voice, not because I was saying something that was so different than the people around me, but I was saying it in certain ways where certain people in power would accept, right or wrong, which that was the truth. If we only want to deal with people whose voices that we can accept, we're not going to be a strong democracy. So we have to create opportunities, create frameworks in the systems that we hold close, so that people can come to us how they are, and we can find ways to accept them and work on their behalf. Because it's not a nice to have; it's something that they're entitled to. And if we don't figure out how to better create systems that provide people what they're entitled to, we're going to be in trouble, whether that be the Democratic Party, whether that be the state of North Carolina, or this country as a whole.
Beautiful response. So we've got time for maybe 2 more questions, maybe 3. So we'll come to Kenny, then we'll come back to you, Preston, and then we'll close out with one last comment or question. So Kenneth.
This is a follow-up to, I mean, you almost asked the question for me, but I'm going to ask it to Braxton, who's also our council member at large, my council member at large in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm going to ask it to him a little bit more direct. What specifically will you being in this position first? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. So first question, first part of the question, Braxton, is, has there ever been a Black commissioner in the state of North Carolina? I don't believe that it is, but that's just my belief. I've rode in many elevators over the last 30 years in North Carolina. I've never seen one in the elevator. So would that be first? You're shaking your head yes, so I assume that yes. So next question, more specifically, what will you do in this position for poor Black men and women, those who are formerly incarcerated, and those of my family and friends who are poor and white in rural areas throughout North Carolina, who are struggling just as much as Black people in inner cities are.
Good question.
Well, I think one of the number one things is when people know their rights, when people know their resources that they can go to when they believe that their rights are being mistreated or violated, that is a certain power, right? And so there's never been a Black commissioner of labor. There have only been two, if I'm not mistaken, Republican commissioners of labor, and they have been in power for the past 30 years or so, as you said. And one of my beliefs, like I said, unfortunately, I wish that labor issues were nonpartisan, but they're not. And over the past 30 years, I believe this department, the power of it and the efficacy of it has been eroded intentionally, right? So that workers, specifically those that are working on the lower parts of the economic scale, don't feel that they have power, right? Who are you supposed to go to, when you work all these hours and your check ain't right? Who are you supposed to go to when there are unsafe things going on in your workplace and your boss is not being responsive? Most people might tell you, oh, you need to go get a lawyer. Who can afford that, right? And really the answer isn't you need to go get a lawyer. The answer is you need to contact occupational safety health department. You need to contact the Department of Labor. And when the Department of Labor is contacted, you should expect that they will be responsive and provide you those resources and services that you are entitled to. You should expect that whether you speak English or Spanish as your primary language, or other languages. So first and foremost, I can't understate how important it is to have a Department of Labor that is fully staffed so that we're not constantly chasing our tail once people get hurt or once people die. How do we go into the communities and inform them of their rights, inform them of how do they access the services that they pay for out of their paychecks without incurring any type of retaliation or without incurring any types of unnecessary costs in that. I can tell you that might not sound revolutionary, but I cannot overstate how important it is for workers in different parts, whether it's in Charlotte, in Asheboro, Wilmington, or Goldsboro, to know how to access those things that they're entitled to.
Right. We are near the very, very end of our conversation. I'm sorry, Preston, we probably won't be able to get back to you. I do see a question in the chat I do want to pose, and that is, do you support collective bargaining for North Carolina municipal workers? And then Cass, very quickly, if you can pose your question, you would take those two questions, and then we'll probably have to begin to wrap it up. I'm so sorry, Preston, but you did have an opportunity to pose at least one good question tonight, two good questions. So I hope that we can get you back on and ask that third question.
I promise I didn't tell him to cut you off because of your hat either.
Yes.
I really had a statement to make. I've known Braxton since we did protest during Keith Lamont Scott. I worked with him on city council on all sorts of different things around police reform, police accountability, affordable housing, and working with the Charlotte City workers. And I will say that he is not afraid to stand up when he needs to stand up. He's not afraid to stand alone. And he has supported workers. And, you know, he's a man of his word, you know, and so we really want to support him and make sure that we get the right person to be able to support these workers and make sure they get a living wage and they're able to not only just get a living wage, but be able to thrive and wind up with generational wealth so that their children and their families can thrive. Because we're not just uplifting workers, we're uplifting communities. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you so much. Braxton, you have the last word and then we'll wrap up tonight.
Yeah, on the topic of collective bargaining, I certainly do. Just to level set real quick, the right to work, I call them the right to work for less laws, are something that is as a law, so that is set by the General Assembly. I do not, as the Commission on Labor, have any authority to implement or take away those laws. Now, I will point out that the front runner on the other side, I think we can call him the front runner. He is the lead sponsor for a bill that would amend a constitutional amendment to our North Carolina state constitution that would implement a right to work amendment to the Constitution. So that's a little different than a law. You can repeal a law. It's a lot more difficult to repeal an amendment to the Constitution. But you know, like I said, I am a union man, and I think we have to. We might have lost Reverend McAllister. I hope we didn't, but we might have.
No, I'm still here.
He's still there. But you know, we have to move away from this dirty word. When we talk about unions, and again, the Department of Labor doesn't have much direct responsibility around labor organizations. But the first two phrases in the preamble of our Constitution is "We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union." A union is the idea that you have a collectively bargained contract, a contract that is bargained between two sides, where you come to an agreement, and that agreement guides and governs how you go day to day. It provides a framework to understand what's right and what's wrong, and it provides a framework where you can mediate conflicts that we might become engaged with underneath that contract. I like to ask people, business owners, workers, or whoever, whenever they cringe when they hear the idea of a collectively bargained contract or a union, why are you so afraid of that? What about it don't you like? And most people can't answer that clearly. They just have always heard that is something that is a bad thing. But I can tell you, negotiating, again, can be very difficult. But business owners that work under collectively bargained contracts like collectively bargained contracts because they know how to hold the other side accountable. They know what they can expect coming in and day out. Collectively bargained contracts make us stronger. They make workplaces stronger. They make workers stronger, and they make communities stronger. So I hope that we can get to a place where we're able to provide more people the power of a collectively bargained contract. And I certainly will continue to do what I can in whatever role that I'm in to speak to the power, the effectiveness, and the efficiency of that.
Right. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed this conversation tonight. I think it's been extraordinary. I think it's been illuminating in so many ways. And just to be very, very clear, I realize that many of us who are on the call tonight, some of you are supporters of Braxton in this campaign, and we're happy that you are with us tonight. Even though we are not endorsing his campaign, we're certainly endorsing what he has said, and you can interpret that however you wish to interpret it. But it's important, I think, to continue to have these conversations. And Braxton, we wanted to have you on this call because you are a man of color. You are a person who understands and who empathizes with the plight of those who are not just persons of color, but people who are poor, people who have been disenfranchised, as well as being able to connect and relate to those with means. And so I'm hopeful and optimistic that this conversation will actually germinate, that the seeds that we planted here tonight will continue to grow. And you're certainly welcome to come back and talk to us when you have an opportunity, when you have time. And when you do, bring none other than Preston Gibson with you. Bring him with you because we realized we couldn't get to that final question that he wanted to ask. I want to thank you all tonight for being with us, and join us again. We'll have another installment of NC Chop It Up in roughly 2 weeks. You can go to ncdp.org/CCE to view this and other events. So you can look in the chat and you can see the link. I think I'm reading it correctly, ncdp.org/CCE to view this and other events. Yes, sir, Braxton, go ahead.
I just want to, today, you just reminded me something. I do want to thank the North Carolina Democratic Party for doing these Chop It Up events, for sustaining them. You know, I think it's important, as you said, as men of color, particularly Black men, for us to know that political power is important. There is a space for us to explore that political power. And you can come as you are. You don't have to just show up on your best day. You don't have to stay away if you're at your worst. So thank you for providing this platform. And I hope that all of us can go out. Don't forget my campaign, but most importantly, to go out and let folks know, Black men know, that we need their voice in these political processes. And there's a place for them to lead in them. So thank you, NCDP, for doing this.
That's it, everybody.
And you can vote on March 5th, 2004.
March 5th. Preston's got his hand up. Yvette
Be safe.
Be safe. Yvette, you had a thought?
No, I was just going to ask you all to tell everybody that we're in the midst of early voting right now.
Yes.
We have a primary here in Charlotte, and that the primary is on September 12th. Early voting. We have one location open now, but they will open more on September the 5th. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I believe that wraps it up for the night. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Until then.
Go to votebraxton.com to learn more. Votebraxton.com.